and enigmatic. Most wear this mystery around themselves like a cloak, almost ostentatious in their guile. The same could be said about Velayne Ramaeus, though such sentiments would hardly do the mysterious Inquisitor justice. Little of certainty is known about the woman, though her credentials are of the highest order, and as a result, her authority among the Death Watch is all but limitless. None remember the details of her arrival in the Jericho Reach, though most assume that the Inquisitor rode in on the first waves of the Great Crusade, as few can recall her presence before that time. If asked directly about her service with the Death Watch, the stewards of Watch Fortress Eriok react with puzzlement. Back through the centuries, scattered among the recollections of the older members of the Death Watch, are memories of a woman bearing her description, though no official record exists as evidence. It is almost as though she had always been there, but went unnoticed until the last several solar decades. Beyond her inquisitorial rosette and authentication seal, no concrete record exists of her before the discovery of the Jericho Maw warp gate leading to the edge of the Calixis sector. Despite this lag, the Watch Fortress Eriok Chamber of Vigilance has reconciled her credentials and required no other confirmation of her devotion. Since her arrival, she has proved to be like many of her kind, not one for sloth or inactivity. In but a few short standard years, she had taken command of the dead stations and collected about her the 4 members of the Death Watch who would become known collectively as the Dead Cabal. With her trusted battle brothers positioned throughout the Jericho Reach and watchful for unusual phenomena and dire warning signs, the Inquisitor set about her own work, though what this is, few can say. The few times she has made her actions widely known, it was to provide evidence that the things which lurk between the stars of the Jericho Reach are stirring, and to demand that the Death Watch take action against them. Perhaps due to her intense secrecy and unwillingness to disclose what she has learned, these warnings and demands have largely fallen on deaf ears. As a result, Inquisitor Ramaeus spends little time actually aboard the watch stations of the Death Watch, and rarely, if ever, enters the confines of Watch Fortress Eriok. Despite her routine absence, she has a reputation for suddenly appearing where she is most needed, and vanishing just as abruptly when the situation has passed. A habit that does little to inspire trust among her fellows. She has a habit of finishing the sentences of others and responding to their actions before they happen, almost as though she knows what one is about to say or do before they do it. Some speculate that this shows that the Inquisitor possesses some psychic talent. Other highly learned scholars and adepts among the Death Watch whisper even more mysterious explanations, perhaps even a connection to the obscure Ordo Kronos. What Velayne Ramaeus' true purpose is, not even the members of the Dead Cabal can accurately say. Many among the Death Watch suspect that the outspoken Inquisitor knows a great deal more about the goings-on of the Jericho Reach than she lets on, and a small few accuse her of outright sabotage and treason. She, for her part, does little to acknowledge these accusations, simply dismissing them as the idle chatter of those who spend too little time taking action against the doom which lies ever at the doorstep of the Imperium. These days, the Inquisitor leaves the matters of the dead Cabal to those whom she trusts, like Watch Captain Matthias, in the main. There are a great many rumors concerning Inquisitor Ramaeus among the Space Marines and Inquisitors of Watch Fortress Eriok, but each is as unsubstantiated as the next. Some speculate that lack of recorded information concerning her is due to a cover-up of the highest order, that perhaps all record of her has been expunged to conceal her place in a great conspiracy, or to obscure her part in a failed operation. Others suspect that she is not who she says she is, and that the Chamber of Vigilance has placed undue trust on the duplicitous Inquisitor. True paranoiacs among the Inquisition even claim to have evidence that Inquisitor Ramaeus is in fact a highly trained operative of the Officios Assassinorum sent to infiltrate the Death Watch until the day when her murderous arts shall be called upon. Whispers between these skeptics claim that Ramaeus has learned the use of polymorphine from the Calidus Temple assassins and uses the transformative, shape-shifting drug to take the form of any number of individuals throughout the Death Watch in the Jericho Reach, thus explaining her mysterious comings and goings. For her part, she does little to quell these rumors and doesn't explain herself, leaving her brethren to speculate, while she guards the Imperial holdings in the Jericho Reach against what is to come. In recent years, she has become more active than ever before. She travels the Reach by her usual unknown means, passing from one dead world to the next, with a haste and an urgency that has drawn the attention of the Battle Brothers stationed aboard the dead stations. Where once she acted entirely alone, she has recently led several separate excursions to the worlds of the Dark Pattern. Some of these missions end in conflict and bloodshed, as the Inquisitor and her chosen escorts unearth the slumbering horrors of these worlds. Others, prepared for similar action, find only dead rock and barren wastes, almost as if the Inquisitor were expecting some event that had yet to happen. Recently, she has been conferring closely with Night Warden Ulrich, though the subject of those conversations remains unknown. Given their shared preference for working alone out among the scattered worlds of the Dark Pattern, such discussions suggest a discovery which may have dire implications for the Jericho Reach. As well, these interactions give some credence to the long-standing suspicions that the Inquisitor and the inscrutable Black Shield had a connection to one another prior to their time in the Death Watch. Ivixia was recruited from one of the Schola Progenium on Elena Mora. She was the daughter of the Imperial Guard Colonel Dannica, whose regiment had been seconded to the service with Inquisitor Grain of the Ordo Hereticus during his examinations into the Cardinal of Elena Mora during the Saragossa Schism. The lengthy nature of this examination, in which tens of thousands were called to account, necessitated whole swaths of the Cardinal's congregation be put under armed quarantine. Following the successful persecution of the Cardinal for his apostate teachings and the prescribed punishment of both him and his world, Colonel Danica's regiment were granted feudal rights over the ashes of this world. Ivixia learned the dangers of apostasy and the solemn duty of an imperial servant, that not even death could end at her father's knee. She was the most faithful in her devotions to the Emperor and the ecclesiarchy of all her fellow pupils. The tales of executed cardinals' wickedness filled her with a righteous loathing of all things heretical and evil. Such was her fervor in this pious hatred that many believed she would take her vows and become a member of one of the militant orders of the Adepta Sororitas. But such was not to be. On Ivixia's 18th birthday, Inquisitor Covenant appeared at her family's estate and demanded to see the young girl. The colonel obeyed the mysterious robed figure and allowed him to speak with his daughter. Covenant was convinced that Ivixia would make an ideal recruit for his retinue and began subjecting her to a lengthy series of ordeals to prove her spiritual purity and physical suitability. She passed each one with ease, but as she continued with the tests, an act of base treachery reaching back to the examination of Inquisitor Grain was to come to fruition. The roots of heresy run deep, and it is rightly said that the weed of corruption can fester even in the purest soil. There had been those who had escaped the initial purges of Colonel Danica's regiment, and had clandestinely continued following the apostate teachings of the planet's former ruler. A network of demon-hunting cults existed throughout the planet, slowly gathering power until such time as they were ready to avenge their master and regain control of their world. As Ivixia's tests continued, the Chaos Cultists struck at the one man on Elena Mora who symbolized their defeat, and who they held responsible for the death of their leader, Colonel Danica. Infernal pacts were formed, blood sacrifices were made to the ruinous powers, and effigies of the Colonel burned in sacrificial flames. As Danica and his family attended a regimental ball, a demon from the darkest regions of the warp manifested in a blazing pyre of blood, slaughtering the guests in a frenzy of bloodletting. Schooled in the mystical arts of the demon hunter, Covenant was able to hold the demon at bay, but not before it slew the colonel with a sweep of a warp-forged blade. The colonel's body burst into flames, immolating in a heartbeat until nothing but his charred skull remained. At the sight of her father's murder, Ivixia screamed at the demon, and the power of her words staggered it for the briefest instant. It was all the opening Covenant needed, and he was able to destroy its form and send it back from whence it came. In the aftermath of the massacre, Inquisitor Covenant led the purges of the cults with Ivixia at his side, convinced more than ever that she was the right choice for his acolyte. 6 solar months to the day following her father's death, Inquisitor Covenant left Elena Mora with Ivixia Dannica as his latest acolyte. Recalling the teachings of her father, she had his skull modified by the lex mechanics of Inquisitor Covenant and turned into a weapon-carrying servo skull. Now her father would remain with her wherever she went, and could continue to serve the Emperor beyond death. Together, they continued to travel around the southern rim of the galaxy, stamping out many blasphemous sects dedicated to the worship of demons and other warp-spawned abominations. Together with a disreputable type who claimed to be a Duke von Castellan, they defeated the hedonistic priesthood of the Decagogue of Panetha Warn and prevented the manifestation of the demon prince Urgalath the Rancid on Saneriax IV. She learned from her master at an astounding rate, taking on her mentor's puritanical firebrand attitude, brooking no corruption or laxity in her investigations. Soon, there was nothing more Covenant could teach her, and successfully petitioned the conclaves of the Ordos Tempestus for her ascension to full Inquisitor. On Chimaru Majoris, she led a force of inducted guardsmen against the primitive, idol-worshipping tribes of the Western continent, declaring them Demonicus Frateris, and personally tore down the vulgar and profane totem poles at the center of each village. As her crusade continued, the tribes fought back with great ferocity, taking to the mountains and launching brutal hit-and-run attacks on Ivixia's forces. But axes and javelins are no match for lasers and tanks, and eventually the tribes were driven back to a valley sacred to their people and began a conjuration that would summon the greatest of their gods. This was a creature said to be composed of mist that could not be harmed and had the power to kill a man with a glance. At the height of the battle, a scarlet mist poured from the mouth of the tribe's greatest champion, and a glittering being that rippled with iridescent colors erupted from his body. Amid the ruin of his flesh, a bull-headed demon of Slanesh was born in the heart of the Imperial troopers. The slaughter was terrible, and hundreds of men were killed as they laid down their weapons before this terrible yet demonically alluring beast. But Ivixia had foreseen such an event and had a plan in place to defeat any such manifestations. Having already unearthed the truth of what the tribes were worshipping, she had requested the aid of the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus. Activating a teleport Homer, she called down a squad of Grey Knights Terminators who waited in orbit for just such a moment. Together with rallied squads of Imperial Guardsmen, they destroyed the demon and wiped the last remnants of its followers from the face of Chimaru Majoris. Their lands were declared purgatus and sown with blessed salt that they might not give rise to anything for 100 years. With the success of the Chimaru Majoris campaign behind her, Ivixia returned to the galactic core, destroying many blasphemous demonic creatures on many different worlds. On Prenau, she joined the defense of the Basilica Dominastrus and saved the Sisters of Ordo Hospitaller who dwelled there. She also tracked down the instigators of the attack and recovered the shards of Saint Josmain's armor, one of the Basilica's most holy relics, which had been stolen in the first days of the battle. In recognition of this deed, the Ecclesiarchy ordered that fragments should be shorn from the armor and incorporated into a holy weapon to be crafted in her honor. As word of her bravery and purity spread, she was honored on Ophelia IV with a blessed suit of armor for her efforts in defending the realms of the Emperor from the taint of the demonic and heretical. Her strength of purpose and chaste piety attracted many followers along the way, and all were of the highest purity, as Ivixia would tolerate nothing less than the same standards she applied to herself in her followers. One such follower she discovered on the world of Caris-Cephalon, while on the trail of Inquisitors she believed were harboring and making use of demon hosts. She discovered a diminutive, solitary individual known as Jeremiah sheltering in the mutant ghettos of this troubled world. Shunned even by the mutants of Caris-Cephalon, it soon became apparent to Ivixia that Jeremiah was an outcast known in some circles as a pariah, soulless and loathed by all. But as a consequence of this, he was a potent defense against psychic powers, thus a hugely valuable addition to a demon hunter's retinue. Despite his reluctance, he knew that refusal was not an option, and accompanied Ivixia in her pursuit of the fallen Inquisitors. She just missed one such Inquisitor at the Forge Mine complex of Taberna Ostium and arrived just too late to apprehend another in the blazing ruins of Paganus Reach. The bullet-riddled remains of the town indicated that a fierce battle had occurred here, and upon returning to Cephalon, she was to learn that the fearsome figure of witch hunter Tyrus had apprehended her prey. Marching to the witch hunter's lodgings, she demanded that he hand the traitor over to the Ordo Maleus. Naturally, Tyrus refused, stating that the heretic Kessel would burn in the fires of purgation, but that one blasphemer had escaped his holy clutches. Furious at his refusal to hand over a consorter with demons, she attacked his warband, but was given a sharp lesson in why Tyrus is such a feared individual throughout the galaxy. Realizing that violence was not the way forward, she again approached him, this time in the spirit of cooperation, and learned that the escaped rogue Inquisitor did indeed traffic with demons and make use of dangerous psychic powers. The Ordo Maleus reserves a special hatred for those of their order who cross the line into demonancy, and none more so than Ivixia. Setting off on the trail of this escaped rogue, she and her retinue departed Caris-Cephalon, the name of the traitor on their lips, Liechtenstein. There are amongst our Ordo those who say that I seek advancement for my own purposes, and they are correct. My purpose is to destroy the demonic, and if I must rise to command an entire sector to do so, then so be it. I am a servant of the Emperor, and only those who consort with warp spawn need fear my ambition. From Inquisitor Lord Torquemada Coteaz. Torquemada Coteaz is a Puritan Inquisitor Lord and Psyker of the Ordo Maleus who gained his reputation for being a fearsome demon hunter through solar decades of action against the forces of chaos. He is now known as the High Protector of the Formosa sector. With his power and popularity, he is served by literally thousands of acolytes and throne agents, and he arms himself with rare weapons and war gear, like his anointed demon hammer, artificer armor, a twin-headed Glovodan cyber eagle familiar, and various potent relics of the Inquisition. he has ever been driven by a single consuming passion: to destroy demons wheresoever they manifest. Unlike many of his fellow Inquisitors of the Order Malleus who pursue the radical path, Coteaz always refused to contemplate harnessing the power of the warp for his own ends, and aggressively prosecuted those who lacked his purity. So perished Coteaz's mentor, Inquisitor Lord Leridian, an old man executed at his own student's hand for dabbling in forbidden arts. He became infamous for this betrayal of his former master. During one of the inquisitorial conclaves on the planet Veroth, Coteaz's erstwhile mentor, Inquisitor Lord Leridian, presented a warp-tainted crystal to the conclave, which he claimed was a potential useful item to track and root out other, similarly tainted items. He hoped to harness similar chaos relics in the name of mankind, and pleaded for the Order Malleus to study the artifact. As Leridian finished his plea, Coteaz stood up and brought down his demon hammer on the crystal, shattering it utterly, while leveling an accusation of extremis diabolus against Leridian, denouncing him as a blasphemer and trafficker with abominations. Coteaz ended his demonstration of guilt by executing the heretic himself on the spot. This decisive act, combined with his absolute intransigence against using anything ever touched by the arch-enemy, ensured that Coteaz was promoted to the rank of Inquisitor Lord himself to fill the place of the man he had just executed by the shocked conclave. After Leridian's death, he assumed his responsibility as High Protector of the Formosa sector. Through alliance, coercion, and outright intimidation, he formed a spy network of contacts, henchmen, and infiltrators throughout the sector's inhabited worlds. Not for Coteaz is the way of the inquisitorial mandate of requisitioning Imperial troops when need presents itself. Instead, he sought to build an army of his own, ever at his beck and call. As its High Protector, Coteaz has thousands of followers in the Formosa sector of many different dispositions. His base of operations is the inquisitorial fortress of Nemesis Tessera. It is not known how many of the Formosa sector's planetary defense forces are as much Coteaz's sworn men as they are those of their commanders, or how many Hive City gangs act under his control, given license to pursue their own petty activities so long as they act as his eyes. People disappear easily in Formosa, and its citizens know better than to inquire. At first glance, Coteaz's stranglehold on the sector would seem merely another cautionary tale concerning the temptations of absolute power. Yet he does not seek to rule, and the sector's planetary governors are left to oversee their duties largely without oversight or interference. Coteaz's network of informants exists only to provide warning of any threat overtaking Formosa. It is a most efficient form of protection. After all, in a sector where any gathering of 3 citizens contains at least 2 of his informants, it is nearly impossible for a traitor to gather a following. Thus has his domain prospered in an age when the Imperium is increasingly brought to ruin by the enemy within. Few other men could hope to replicate this success, for Coteaz is a man consumed by his chosen task. He seldom sleeps and spends every waking hour sifting through reports delivered by his faithful Glovadan Cyber Eagle, or personally leading his forces against demons, heretics, or xenos foolish enough to trespass on his realm. Lately, he has cast his pall of influence over worlds bordering the Formosa sector, bringing yet more planets under his protection. Yet even as his borders expand, his worries grow. He is now an old man, and like all old men, he fears leaving his work undone without a successor to continue it. Of all the many acolytes he has cultivated, none have had the necessary drive or strength of will. Thusly, Coteaz has begun a search for forgotten fragments of cloning lore and alien rejuvenation technology, any means of extending his life, or rather, any means bar one. Coteaz knows that the boon he seeks could easily be granted by a demon, should he summon and bind it according to the proper rituals. Part of him longs to embrace this small evil, that it may firm up the foundations of his righteous work. It is a temptation that grows stronger with every passing solar day, but one that he has stalwartly resisted, at least so far. Inquisitor Lord Coteaz's career is long and filled with incident. Most notable amongst his many persecutions of the demon and the heretic are the following: the extermination of the Zetharites during the Lorgamar rebellions, for which he was later known as the Scourge of the Zetharites; the purging of the Medarian Nebula; the cleansing of the hive cities of Aprilia of the taint of the Plague Lord Nurgle, known as the Great Cleansing of 972 M41, and the destruction of the demon engineers of Forge World Glovadar, for which the Adeptus Mechanicus gifted him the Glovadan Eagle, a twin-headed cyber eagle, to serve as his familiar. During the cleansing of Aprilia in 972 M41, Coteaz cast out demons from 1,000,000 demon hosts and killed the demon prince Carpathy, the Occludor, with the aid of the Exorcist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. In this conflict, he used a chimera of inquisitorial stormtroopers, which was inscribed with a line from the Exorcism Deus Abominatus. During the 13th Black Crusade in circa 999 M41, he led multiple strike forces of Grey Knights against demon outbreaks in the Agrippina sector, as well as on Khazar Holm and Xerxia. After the birth of the Great Rift in the era Indomitus, during the Indomitus Crusade, he received a mysterious message from the craft world Eldari about the threat posed by the Arks of Omen, now in the possession of Abaddon the Despoiler, as a result of his alliance with the demon Vashtor. Though he did not trust the Xenos due to their well-known reputation for duplicity, Coteaz nonetheless began to investigate the recent Chaos invasions that had made use of the Arks of Omen and try to piece together the truth of the matter. You ask why we must cleanse the Xenos. I will tell you. The filth of the alien and the witch must be exterminated to preserve the purity of the human race, lest we degenerate into abomination. From Witch Hunter Tyrus at the Conclave of Vera. Tyrus is a witch hunter inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus, and a staunch follower of the mono-dominant philosophy of the Inquisition, a bombastic man whose bloody purges have left thousands of heretics dead in his wake. Suspicious of all psykers, even those supposedly cleared by the Inquisition, it is Tyrus's creed to hunt down and exterminate every witch, mutant, and warlock in the galaxy. If, along the way, this means eradicating those who would seek to protect such abhorrent creatures, then so be it. Tyrus is also perhaps one of the most active inquisitors with regards to internal policing of the Inquisition, ferociously hunting down those whom he deems heretics within the ranks of his own organization. The young Tyrus was orphaned when he was a mere 6 summers old, when demons came to his homeworld of Loressa, an isolated agri-world in the Segmentum Obscurus. Acting insidiously through an adolescent girl whose miraculous powers of healing had cured many people from Tyrus's village, the demon prince Koloth the Excoriator spread a plague of mutation across the planet. This weakened the fabric of reality enough for him to force his way from the Imperium into the girl's unprotected mind. In its new guise, the demon destroyed Tyrus's village and began the slaughter of its inhabitants in an orgy of mutilation. Tyrus himself was dragged from his home into the village's main square, where the inhabitants' corpses lay in a heaped pile. Over the next few solar hours, Koloth tortured him, taking an eye and slicing off an ear, that he might still hear his own screams and witness the destruction of his own flesh. As the leering young girl explained precisely what horror she would next visit upon his body, Tyrus despaired and prepared for death. Only the timely intervention of witch hunter Kavonis, who had tracked the demon to Loressa via the Emperor's turret, saved his life. The turret had guided the servants of the Emperor for 10 millennia, and though the significance of its readings are often obscure to the point of becoming meaningless, its holy instruction is said to be imbued with the Emperor's own will. Such seems to have indeed been the case, as Kavonis, clad in a massive suit of elaborately tooled armor, intricately carved with decorative scrollwork and fluting, materialized with 4 grey armored angels of destruction in the village square. The demon girl paused in her gruesome handiwork and turned to face the witch hunter, a hiss of recognition escaping her possessed lips. Through a red haze, Tyrus saw the mighty figure of Kavonis and his armed brethren do battle with the demon girl. 3 of the angels of death were cut down with bolts of blue fire before Kavonis swung his blessed sword in a glittering arc and beheaded the shrieking demon. Whirlwinds of demonic energy howled around the combatants as the creature was banished back to the hell from whence it came, and Tyrus watched as one of the angels burned the corpse in the cleansing fire of its weapons. Tyrus, almost blinded by pain and blood loss, staggered to the edge of the blaze, his skin blistering in the infernal heat and spat his hatred into the flames. He cursed the demon's name, and, as an armored gauntlet settled on his shoulder, he looked up into the stern features of Kavonis and knew that there was only one path open to him now. He became Kavonis' apprentice and acolyte and journeyed back to the orbiting starship from which Kavonis and the Grey Knights had teleported. He assimilated the wonders of advanced technologies and the ways of the witch hunter with a zeal only the truly dedicated can master. He was gifted with cybernetic replacements for his missing eye and ear, and his new master instructed him in the path of the witch hunter, the tools and methods at their disposal, and lastly, the heresy of the demonic. Never before had his master known an acolyte to master the rites of detestation so quickly, or one whose pious devotion matched his own. As the Tyran years of intense training passed, Tyrus grew to manhood with his hatred of demons and those who would consort with such creatures growing stronger with each passing day. He mastered weapons, martial skills, and the rites by which the demon could be vanquished. Such was his strength of devotion to the immortal God Emperor that his word alone could stay the hand of a demonic creature and cause it to reel in pain at his fiery zeal and faith. Many base and repulsive creatures of the warp were destroyed by Tyrus and his master, until a fateful battle during a royal audience on the world of Epsilon Regalis. The Emperor's turret had led Kavonis and Tyrus to the palaces of Regalis great and mighty in search of deviancy. The monarchy of Epsilon Regalis protested their innocence, but Kavonis was adamant. They would face the trial of the Holy Seal. Into the palms of each member of the royal family, he placed a featureless wax tablet and heated an inquisitorial seal. When the seal glowed with heat, Kavonis explained, he would press it into the wax upon each of their palms. Those whose flesh was burned would know the full wrath of the Inquisition, while those whose skin remained unblemished would have their innocence displayed for all to see. As Kavonis pressed the seal into the first outstretched hand, the features of the king's daughter split apart into the leering face of a demon. Worse, it was a demon Kavonis knew, Koloth the Excoriator. In an instant, the demon was free and dealt a mortal blow to the venerable witch hunter. As he fell, the last vestiges of humanity were cast from the faces of the captives, and the demons were free. Tyrus quickly swept up Kavonis' power knife and set about himself with terrible fury and righteous anger, his heart burning with vengeance. The lesser thrall demons in Koloth's service were no match for him, and at last he and Koloth stood face to face, the sole figures left standing in the gore-spattered audience chamber. The two enemies fought a duel that had been 5 solar decades in the making, and almost killed the witch hunter's apprentice. Bellowing words of holy purity that a demon is forbidden to withstand, Tyrus fought with the strength of the Emperor. The bitter foes traded blows, each grievous enough to fell a lesser being. Sheer force of will kept Tyrus standing, and as he grappled with the demon, sermons of piety and devotion spilling from his lips, he punched Corvinus's weapon through the demon's chest, dragging out its still beating heart, crushed it in his gauntleted fist. The demon grinned as it died, spouting blasphemous oaths that promised the witch hunter that they would meet again, and that it had already watched him die 1,000 times. Suspecting the corruption of the royal family extended to the planet's population, Tyrus launched a bloody purge of the surrounding cities that saw tens of thousands burned at the stake to ensure the purity of Epsilon Regalis. He took his master's suit of artificer armor as his own and repaired the damage which the demon had wrought on its holy fabric. Corvinus's masters elevated Tyrus to the status of witch hunter and granted him the full remit of an Imperial Inquisitor. If his experience with Corvinus had taught him anything, it was that there was only room for one species in the galaxy, and that was humanity. His purges of aliens, heretics, and warlocks have become famous even amongst other Puritan Inquisitors. A fierce mono-dominant, Tyrus's quest to exterminate heresy, witchcraft, and alien influence has carried him from one side of the galaxy to the other, his rousing orations fanning the flames of zeal and faith on every planet he purges. After the Gland War, Dantis III against the Tyranids, Tyrus recruited Sergeant Stone as an acolyte, an Astra Militarum veteran who was one of only 3 survivors of a bionically altered company of the Lostock 23rd. Stone's aggressiveness and devotion to duty made him an ideal member of Tyrus's retinue. During the treachery of Hanuchek, Tyrus joined forces with devotee Malakant, a disciple of the Redemptionist faith spawned on Necromunda, who led his fanatical army on a holy crusade. The battle to destroy Hanuchek all but annihilated Malakant's followers, and at its conclusion, the Redemptionist gladly accompanied Tyrus in his purges. In pursuit of the heretic Inquisitor Liechtenstein, Tyrus journeyed to the world of Caris Cephalon, where he recruited the security enforcer Barbaretta. Her help in investigating the mutant uprisings, which Tyrus believed might have been sponsored by emissary Fabian, was invaluable, and she has proven to be a worthy addition to the witch hunter's retinue of acolytes. He continues to pursue the unholy, purge the unclean, and smite the unworthy. It is his sacred task to bring the fire of the Emperor to those who need it most and destroy those who would see its light dimmed. His reliance on methods first used thousands of Terran years ago is reassuring to many people who see the guilt or innocence of his subjects determined by the will of the Emperor himself. Tyrus is a great believer in many of the more arcane and religious trials and ordeals employed to judge the guilt or innocence of those he investigates. One of the more popular of these is the trial by balance, in which a droplet of the accused person's blood is placed on a set of finely tuned scales opposite the same amount of water blessed by a member of the ecclesiarchy. If the blood proves to be heavier, it is believed that this is because it is weighed down by the guilt of the donor's crimes, and they are condemned. The ordeal of the blade is another, which Tyrus most famously employed on the Sarcophon of Gladrinus VI. A heavy, razor-sharp sword is gripped in the fists of the potential heretic, which they must hold above their head while the Inquisitor lists the accusations leveled against them in order of severity. If they can complete this feat without dropping the blade, or its keen edge drawing blood, they have proved their innocence of the charges. If blood is spilt or the sword slips, the last spoken accusation and those remaining to be leveled are true. Miraculously, Sarkophon Hydropasta successfully endured the ordeal for 3.5 solar hours, while Tyrus listed nearly 1,000 charges against him. There are many other types of trial and ordeal. In trial by Holy Seal, the accused has a wax tablet placed upon their outstretched palm and a hot seal is applied to it. If the skin beneath the wax is burned, this is an indication of guilt. If it is unharmed, this is an indication of the Emperor's blessing. Other times he has ordered those he is investigating to drink a jug of blessed water. If the accused cannot do so without choking or gagging, they are presumed guilty, having been unable to imbibe the holiness of the Emperor. Tyrus has also been known to use the Imperial Tarot, a divination process believed to be guided by the Emperor himself to determine innocence or guilt, literally on the turn of a card. Many are comforted by his use of such traditional methods, and his staunch belief that it is the God Emperor who makes these judgments, not himself. I saw my face, the face I had once had. Gideon Ravenor, young, strong, determined. How I had missed that face. From Inquisitor Gideon. Gideon Ravenor was born in 304 M41. His planet of origin is unknown, though due to the Inquisition's stringent recruitment standards for psykers, Ravenor was likely indoctrinated at the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's Scholastica Sicana from childhood. As a young man, he was assigned by the Ordo Xenos as an interrogator to the infamous Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn. In time, Eisenhorn came to regard him as his foremost pupil and the ideal Inquisitor. One of his early missions was his effort to silence Zygmunt Moloch, a heretic from the dangerous Cognitae, a chaos cult disguised as an academy in the Scarus sector. Moloch was appointed by the Cognitae's Madame Chase to be part of Cognitae's Audion's team to help with a venture involving setting up several arcane mechanisms on the Sleaf Outworld in 336 M41 intended to capture and control warp energy. The planet was covered in thousands of plasma vents that contained the energy of the warp and which the Cognitae devices could capture and store. Ravenor and his team caught up with the Chaos Cultists and stopped them. He assumed Moloch, who was the lone remaining survivor of the Cognitae operatives, was dead after he threw himself into one of the plasma vents. What Ravenor didn't know was that Moloch had been teleported to the starship October Country moments before his death. Though he had been burned very badly by the plasma and his face had been largely disfigured by the burns. Although Moloch was silent for many standard years, this incident would not be the last time he threatened the Imperium. During his time as an interrogator in Gregor Eisenhorn's retinue of acolytes, Ravenor enjoyed a long relationship with the Carthene swordswoman Arianrod Su Swadir. This love affair came to a swift halt when Arianrhod was slain by a Drukhari homunculus from the cabal of the Fell Witch during the cleansing of a xenophile cult on the world of Leith 11 in 338 M41. Shortly after this grave personal tragedy, Ravenor participated alongside his master in a great triumph on the world of Thracian Primaris to celebrate the success of the Ophidian Crusade. Due to the machinations of the radical Inquisitor Crixos, the triumph ended in blood-soaked horror when the parade was attacked by chaos-influenced aerospace fighters and 33 Alpha and Alpha Plus grade rogue psychers whom were freed from their holding tanks. Eisenhorn escaped unharmed thanks to the demonic intervention of the warp entity Cherubale, who saw future potential in his continued existence. Ravenor, on the other hand, was horrifically crippled, suffering third-degree burns over the entirety of his body, and he was reduced to a barely animate shell. Unable to move or speak, he had to be consigned to an enclosed force chair, unable to survive without the chair's elaborate life support systems to sustain him, and incapable of physical interaction with his environment except through the chair's auto sensors and voice synthesizers. Though physically incapacitated, his psychic abilities flourished, despite or perhaps because of his injuries and sensory deprivation. Thanks to his psychic power, Ravenor was still able to continue his service to the Inquisition, and after his health had stabilized, he was promoted to full inquisitorial status in 346 M41 on the recommendation of Gregor Eisenhorn. In 402 M41, he and his team investigated the illegal trade in warp-tainted glass, so-called flects, which had surfaced as a drug on the hive world of Justis Majoris. After a long and perilous inquiry, Ravenor discovered that the flecked trade was just a byproduct of a far greater conspiracy. The government of Subsector Angelus had hired a cartel of rogue traders to illegally import high-powered cogitators from the desolated and heavily warp-tainted Vinices subsector. These chaos-infused machines were then used to pursue an understanding of Ununcia, an ancient language whose sounds allow their speaker to alter the fabric of reality at will, making anyone who understood the language more powerful than even a psyker, without the need to risk a connection with the Imperium. With the right command words in Ununcia and the empowered patterns he had laid down in the architecture of Justis Majoris hive cities, the condemned heretic Theodore Kaditsky, the lord of Subsector Moloch, planned to make himself into a godlike demonic being. The Lord Governor of Subsector Oscar, Ludolf Barazan, also known as the Diadochoi, and Chief Provost Jada Trice were in charge of the plot, and they made use of Magistratum Interior cases to enforce the plot's security and make sure the truth of what they were planning did not reach unwanted ears. In truth, Barazan was actually Zygmunt Moloch, Gideon Ravenor's old enemy, in the attempt to activate Kaditsky's mechanism that was actually the city of Petropolis. Moloch used the Ununcia to restore his ravaged body. Ravenor once again thwarted him, but not exactly as planned. Ironically, the flects, which spread only because of the greed of the Justis Majoris government's hired traders, was what made Moloch's master plan fail. Ravenor's vain interrogator Carl Thonius, who had become addicted to the use of flects during the investigation, happened upon one which contained the essence of an unimaginably powerful demon named Slight. Step by step, and without Ravenor's knowledge, Slight possessed and manifested itself through Thonius, a process that granted the interrogator terrible powers. Only the intervention of the possessed Thonius allowed Ravenor's team to foil Moloch's plans, and the heretic was forced to flee. Thonius successfully contained the demon within himself for a long time, but during Ravenor's final confrontation with Moloch on Gudrun in 404 M41, Slight finally manifested itself fully, and thereby destroyed the body and soul of Carl Thonius. Only the combined psychic powers of Ravenor and Moloch, aided by a stable warp gate and psychic sorcery, allowed the team to banish the demon back to the realm of chaos. Afterwards, Ravenor executed Moloch for his crimes against the Emperor and turned himself over to the Inquisition, confessing everything. After a long and thorough interrogation and purification process, Ravenor was acquitted of any chaos taint, but his good reputation was forever soiled, and he was for the rest of his career labeled as a radical by his Puritan peers in the Inquisition. He was retired from the Inquisition for a time, though he eventually was placed back into active service to hunt down and sanction his former mentor, Gregor Eisenhorn, who had also been declared a radical and a rogue on the planet of Sankor in the Angelus subsector. He later reunited with Eisenhorn, as the two happened to both be investigating the Cognitae and the mysterious King in Yellow. Ultimately, Eisenhorn broke Elizabeth Bequin, his former acolyte who was a psychic blank, out of Ravenor's custody in order to use her in the fight against the mysterious figure known as the King in Yellow. Believed by some to be a figure of mere folk legend, the legend of the King in Yellow and his inner circle called the Eight have existed for many centuries. The King was an enemy of both Gregor Eisenhorn and Gideon, as well as rival Chaos Space Marine sects. The King's identity and purpose are unknown, except that it involves the Materium. Apparently, one of his goals is to obtain the true name of the Emperor, in order to obtain power over him, and this has led him in searches from the planet of the Sorcerers to Sicarius to the Black Library. Eisenhorn and later Ravenor pledged to hunt down and destroy the King in Yellow before he completed his ultimate objective. In his early years as an Inquisitor, Ravenor subscribed to the more radical inquisitorial philosophical sect. He has been known to cooperate with worthy aliens and to use his psychic abilities to predict the future. Some years after the disaster on Thracian Primaris, he even apprenticed himself to an unknown Asuriani farseer to learn divination. The knowledge and allies he gained through this pact made it possible for him and Gregor Eisenhorn to defeat the arch-traitor Pontius Glor on the planet 5213X in 345 M41, and thereby, according to the farseer, save the galaxy and the Imperium of Man from utter destruction. In time, his stance towards divination seems to have changed. During his investigation of the Contract 13 cartel on Justus Majoris in 402 M41, he claimed to loathe farseeing because of the confusing and madness-inducing aspects of the resulting prophecies. It is unclear when he changed his view, but his newfound aversion did not stop him from using Eldari artifacts or from trusting prophetic visions when they presented themselves. Despite his often unorthodox methods and powerful psychic ability, Ravenor was for a long time seen as a Puritan by the political factions within the Inquisition. This view was probably a product of his published philosophic works and his reclusive lifestyle. In the end, his own conscience was what destroyed his reputation. In 404 M41, after the slight incident, Ravenor turned himself and evidence of his sorcerous activities over to the Helican Conclave. He was acquitted of possessing any chaos taint, mostly due to the help of his former master, Eisenhorn's old friend Inquisitor Lord Rorken, who at the time was the Grand Master of the Helican Conclave. Even though he got away with only a warning, he was, like his master before him, labeled a radical. Gideon Ravenor has on occasion been referred to as an Alpha Plus grade Psyker. His psychic abilities are most potent in 3 areas: telepathy, telekinesis, and divination. He can mind skim whole hive cities in a search for specific persons, crush individual enemies with his mind, and with great difficulty see faint images of possible futures. To strengthen his abilities, he uses several psychically attuned artifacts, like his anti-gravitic force chair, which is equipped with technological psi boosters that increase his raw psychic strength. And some of his acolytes even wear Asuriani Wraithbone amulets that allow him to more easily contact or possess his servants telepathically. When it comes to his physical appearance, at the time of the death of Beldam Sadia, before his injuries on Thracian Primaris, Ravenor was tall and handsome, with long black hair pulled back in a long ponytail, high cheekbones, and a finely sculpted face. He possessed a noble and ageless quality in his eyes, faintly reminiscent of the Eldari. After being horrifically crippled on Thracian Primaris, however, his physical body was reduced to a charred, barely animate husk, unable to move or speak, and with his limbs and physical senses scorched away. Now, he can only survive through the use of the life support systems of a specifically designed force chair. Its elaborate systems enable him to move, speak, and breathe. It also is incredibly strong, much like the power armor of a space marine. The chair carries its own cogitator, and as a weapon, it is mounted with paired psi cannons. Physically, Gideon Ravenor is but a shell of his former self, but psychically, his mind has vastly expanded the wealth of experience available to him. Amberley Vail is an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, best known for her close professional and personal association with the famous Commissar Cyphers Kane. Vail does not profess allegiance to any particular inquisitorial faction, but her actions are generally those of a Puritan. She prefers safe disposal of Xenos or Chaos artifacts in most cases, with few exceptions, and she considers radicals of any ordo to be barely distinguishable from their heretical prey. Physically, she is tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, and has the powerful contralto voice of a trained singer. In addition to high and low Gothic, she is reasonably fluent in the Tau, Eldari, and Orcish tongues. She operated mostly in the Damocles Gulf and the surrounding space of the Segmentum Ultima. Her length of service is currently unknown, but spanned for at least a standard century. She first met Inquisitor Vail in 931 M41, and her active career continued past his eventual death in the 1st century of the 42nd millennium. Vail's first actions mentioned in the Kane archive were in the late 920s M41. After dealing with the space hulk Dolorous Tidings, which delayed her longer than expected, she arrived on Kefia. This agri-world had been the site of a major gene-stealer cult, but the Astra Militarum had already broken its military strength. Inquisitor Vail merely took over from them to root out the last remaining traces. Around this time, she was also involved in a joint Ordo Xenos Adeptus Mechanicus project on the world of Perlia, studying the Shadow Light, a pre-human Xenos relic located there that possessed strange, warp-based powers. The Mechanicus Laboratory shrine studying the artifacts was hidden within a hydroelectric dam in the so-called Valley of Demons. Unfortunately, the project was disrupted by an invasion of the world by the orcs of Wag Korbul, which conquered the continent where the Valley of Demons was located. After the area was reconquered, the laboratory shrine proved to have been robbed by unknown parties, and the Shadowlight stolen. On the bright side, a great many other artifacts were found during the reconstruction efforts. Cypher's Kane had raised an army from within Orc-held territory to meet the green-skin threat, known as the March of the Liberator. They had breached the dam in the Valley of Demons in order to take out an Orc horde, and the resulting flood scoured much of the valley down to bedrock, unearthing dozens of other artifacts that had been buried there. None were of the same potency as the Shadowlight, but many were designed to work with that artifact as part of a greater system of unknown purpose, or were Xenos documentation related to its use. The rebuilt laboratory shrine had plenty of material to study, even without the Shadowlight itself. Amberley Vail's first well-known action was the Gravelax incident in 931 M41, during which she helped prevent both the takeover of the planet Gravelax by the Tau Empire and a plot by a gene-stealer cult to provoke a bloody and pointless war between the Tau and the Imperium. It was during this mission that Vail first met Commissar Cypher's Kane, beginning a long and fruitful relationship. She also discovered that his aide, Farrig Jurgen, was a psychic blank, a fact that likely saved the lives of all three during Kane's duel with the Gene-Stealer Patriarch and Vail's fight with the tainted planetary governor. As the dust settled and the Imperium consolidated its victory on Gravelax, Vail saw the withdrawing Tau rescue two fire warriors who had been lost fighting the Gene-Stealers. She watched in satisfaction, recognizing what the Tau did not. Both scouts were showing clear signs of Gene-Stealer infection, and were doomed to spread their genetic curse to whatever Tau world they were taken to. A standard year later, 932 M41, Vail and Kane met again, following the Valhallan 597th Regiment's encounter with a Necron stasis tomb on the world of Simia Orichalke. The regiment had survived with few losses and apparently destroyed the Necron tomb, though at the cost of losing much of their material and destroying the Prometheum refinery they had come to protect from orcs. At Kane's recommendation, she immediately placed Simia Orichalke under inquisitorial quarantine. She then spent some solar weeks comprehensively debriefing the 597th troops, as well as warning them of the dire consequences they would suffer from the Inquisition should any of them breathe a word about the existence of the undying robotic warriors to anyone else. Even while the regiment was still fighting to hold the refinery, Kane's record search revealed the refinery was not sited on the planet's richest promethium deposits, but on a lesser deposit that was sited directly over the stasis tomb. Vail and her Ordo Hereticus colleague Inquisitor Kuriakin easily discovered which Adeptus Mechanicus Magi chose the site, but were unable to prove that the tech priests were knowingly attempting to gain access to the xenos tomb. The matter is still under investigation by Kuriakin. Shortly after the Semia Orichalke incident in 933 M41, Vail arrived on the odd plateau world of Periremunda. It is unknown what first brought her here. The ongoing civil uprising, which turned out to be the work of yet another gene-stealer cult, or the trail of Ernst Stavros Killian and Magos Matthias, a rogue duo of Inquisitor and Tech Priest identified as the perpetrators of the raid on the Valley of Demons. The gene-stealer infestation proved even worse than that on Gravelax, and a Tyranid hive fleet was already approaching Periremunda in response to the siren call of the gene-stealer cult's broodmind. Vail and her sanctioned psyker Raquel succeeded in hunting down and destroying the gene-stealer patriarch, disrupting the call of the broodmind, at least for the time being. Unfortunately, the shadow in the warp of an approaching splinter fleet remained detectable, and there were indicators that Tyranid scout organisms were already present on the world. On the way back from destroying the cult's patriarch, Vail rescued the recently arrived Cyphers Kane, who had been ambushed in traffic by gene-stealer cultists. As for Killian and Matthias, both Vail and the tech priest Lazarus knew that Matthias was holed up somewhere on the planet, and possibly Killian as well. Though partners in the hunt, Vail and Lazarus both hoped to claim the prestige of finding the renegades and reclaiming the Shadowlight. Both sought assistance from Kane, but as Vail was an old friend and lover of Kane's, and Lazarus was a stranger, his choice proved an easy one. This was fortunate for Vail, as an uptick in gene-stealer cult activity prevented her from investigating the renegades herself. In the following solar weeks, Kane was the target of several different assassination attempts. The first of these, an attempt made by a Chaos Sorcerer, led Vail's party to the mining colony Hell's Edge. The colony had been wiped out by Tyranids, but had clearly hosted Matthias' secret laboratory until then, suggesting that he had somehow fallen in with the Chaos cult to which the sorcerer belonged. Another assassination attempt prompted Kane to visit Gavaron, home of the Adeptus Sororitas' Order of the White Rose, and Vail's retinue came along disguised as his military escort. Unexpectedly, their car was diverted to the Sororitas convent itself. It turned out that the Order of the White Rose was actually in the service of Inquisitor Killian, as the Sisters of Battle were unaware that he was a renegade. They had served as the military force for his and Matthias' raid on the Valley of Demons, as well as their escape from Hell's Edge, and they were the hosts of his new laboratory. Killian had decided that trying to kill Kane wasn't working, and hoped to sway the Commissar to his own cause instead. He revealed to him that the Shadowlight had the power to activate latent human psykers. Once this was discovered, the Ordo Hereticus arguably had a claim on the artifact, but the tech priests voted to remain with their original partners in the Ordo Xenos. Matthias disagreed, believing that Shadowlight-activated Psyker armies would be the ultimate weapon against the Chaos Gods. He contacted Killian, who he knew was a like-minded radical, and together, the pair destroyed the laboratory shrine and seized the artifact for their own use. The pair had been hiding on Periremunda since then, using the Covenant of the Blessed, Chaos Cult, to test the artifact's powers. As soon as Cain and Killian were out of view, Vail revealed herself to the Canoness of the Covenant and informed her of Killian's excommunication. Shortly afterward, she received a frantic vox from Cain, saying that Killian had brought a Tyranid lictor to the Covenant in order to summon a Tyranid swarm that would bury his trail along with the entire plateau. In the battle that followed, Cain, Vail, and their combined party escaped with the Shadowlight, but Killian and Matthias were both killed, and the Covenant of the White Rose was completely overrun by Tyranids. Vail proceeded to destroy the swarm and the Covenant alike by calling in an orbital lance barrage which cleaved the entire Covenant grounds off the edge of the Gavarone Plateau. The rest of the Tyranids and Gene Stealers were finished off not long after this, as an Imperial relief fleet finally arrived. The ancient Xenos relic was returned to Perlia, where it remained until the turn of the millennium. Vail's activities over the next several solar decades are mostly unrecorded, except that 4 standard years after the events of Periremunda in circa 937 M41, she eliminated a Harad infestation. During the 13th Black Crusade, Vail discovered that one of Abaddon's subordinate Chaos Lords, Varan the Undefeatable, and his army were headed towards Perlia, clearly hungering for the power of the Shadowlight. If he found it, he could manufacture Psykers by the billions, all unprotected by the Emperor's sanction. Reality would be torn asunder throughout the galaxy within solar decades. Varan had to be denied his goal at all costs. Since Varan had thus far easily conquered every Imperial world he had attacked, Vail sent her rogue trader associate Aurelius to spirit away the Shadowlight to safety elsewhere. However, the greater apparatus surrounding the Shadowlight was now too large to move, and moreover, Aurelius' ship was driven out of the system before he could try. Instead, the defense of the artifact fell on the Planetary Defense Force, led by Cypher's Cain. Miraculously, he and his forces managed to hold out long enough to lure Varan into a trap and kill him in a personal duel. All might still have been lost, as Varan's enraged army attacked the laboratory shrine in full force. Unexpectedly, however, a Necron monolith phalanx materialized at the Chaos Army's rear. The Necrons ripped through the lost and the damned like a chainsaw through butter, marched into the shrine as the Imperial defenders hastily got out of their way, defeated an attempt to self-destruct the shrine, and absconded with the Shadowlight. Cain and Vail later concluded that the complete Shadowlight complex was a psychic superweapon created by the long-vanished Old Ones to fight the Necrons, who greatly feared psychic powers and the energies of the warp. A Necron surveillance post had been lurking in the Perlia system for eons, hoping to finally neutralize the ancient weapon. Varan's attack had revealed the artifact to them, at which point the Necrons launched a raid to seize it. While not an ideal resolution, if the Necrons had feared the Shadow Light so, they likely had no plans to use it against the Imperium. Better for the artifact to fall into their hands rather than those of the forces of chaos. After Cypher's Kane died, Inquisitor Vail examined his personal effects in order to secure any Imperial secrets they might hold. In the process, she found a data slate full of jumbled files, which Kane apparently wrote during his retirement as a sort of retrospective private journal. Unlike his official memoir, To Serve the Emperor, a Commissar's Life, these accounts were brutally honest about both the redacted parts of Kane's famous exploits and the Commissar's own less than noble motives. Naturally, Vail immediately placed the contents of the slate under Inquisitorial seal. Imperial secrets aside, the Inquisition could hardly allow the public to know that the celebrated hero of the Imperium was in fact a scoundrel and a self-seeking rogue, let alone that those very flaws likely made him such an effective champion of the Emperor in the first place. However, she did feel that her fellow Inquisitors should understand what had made Kane who he was. Further, over the course of his career, he had fought almost every enemy the Imperium has, from the arch-enemy to the Great Devourer to the greater good of the Tau Empire. Vail felt that the Inquisition should gain the benefit of his own insights into humanity's various enemies. Accordingly, she began a side project to edit the Kane Archive, as it was later called. She sorted the unstructured account into a series of relatively self-contained books, and added various footnotes and material from other sources in order to give Kane's self-centered narrative a wider context. As each book was completed, she released it for internal Inquisition circulation. He was pleased to see them widely read, although less pleased to see that most Inquisitors took them as light entertainment rather than the serious food for thought she intended them to be. Born in 198 M41, on the Cares world, Gregor Eisenhorn was taken at an early age by the Black Ships, and in time he became an acolyte of Inquisitor Hapshad. He studied alongside fellow Inquisition apprentice Titus Endor, and was elevated to the rank of full Inquisitor in 222 M41, at the incredibly young age of 24. His first successful persecution was that of the heretic Lamet Sire. Carving out a stable and competent career, Eisenhorn eventually found himself being drawn into events that would change the course of his life in the year 240 M41. During this year, he succeeded in ending the menace of the mass murderer Murdin I-Clone, investigation that is notable not only for bringing Godwin Fishig and Elizabeth Bequin into his employ as acolytes, but also for setting him in pursuit of both Pontius Glaw and the Necrotech. Following leads from the I-Clone investigation, he became tangled up with a heretical cabal on the world of Gudrun, and in fact, was briefly captured and tortured by one of its members, Gorgon Locke. The cabal was eventually broken by a full inquisitorial purge, led by Inquisitor Vogue. Eisenhorn was able to recover a device known as the Pontius from the Cabal, and it later transpired that this device held the encoded brain engrams of the infamous and long-dead heretic Pontius Glaw. One of the Cabal's schemes had involved arranging his resurrection. Eisenhorn held Pontius Glaw captive and interrogated him regularly, before finally choosing to have the Pontius device incarcerated by Magos Geared Bjor of the Adeptus Mechanicus. This decision would ultimately have a profound effect on his future. Following up further leads from the Cabal Purge led Eisenhorn into one of his most famous investigations, the affair of the Necrotech, a tome of chaos knowledge. Eisenhorn tracked the survivors of the heretical Gudrun Cabal to a colony world inhabited by the xenos Saruthi. The Saruthi had come into the possession of a copy of the Necrotech and had translated it into their own language, creating two versions of this powerful chaos tome and a translating tool. The human Necrotech tome, written in High Gothic, was quickly found and destroyed by him. Some radical Inquisitors deemed this a heretical act and damned Eisenhorn for it. However, the majority of the local inquisitorial conclave, which was dominated by Puritans, supported his decision to burn it, outvoting the radicals. Eisenhorn was therefore spared from censure, and was in fact instrumental in planning a raid on the Saruthi homeworld, during which the remaining tainted items were destroyed. It was during this attack that he also first met Cherubale, a powerful demon host who would plague him and the Imperium in later endeavors. The following year, in 241 M41, Eisenhorn investigated the apparent ritual murders on the world of Samatha, at first believing the killings to be the work of some chaos cult. Soon, however, it was revealed that the culprits were actually ex-soldiers of the Astra Militarum. These former soldiers of the Samatha 9th Infantry Regiment had been driven mad by the horrors they had faced in war, and were ritually killing regular citizens. Backed up by the arbitrators of the local Adeptus Arbites, Eisenhorn managed to corner and eliminate the fanatics in an abandoned and decaying building. During the resultant firefight, he lost his left hand to an experienced former sharpshooter. He was offered a bionic prosthetic, but declined, making do with a fused stump until he could have a vat-grown hand grafted on 2 years later. In 312 M41, his best friend and acolyte Midas Betancourt was killed by the heretic Fade Thuring during an investigation. Thuring escaped, and Eisenhorn promised to keep a watchful eye on Midas's infant daughter, Medea. Years later, when she came of age, she would follow the path of her father and join the retinue of Inquisitor Eisenhorn as his pilot. 26 Tehran years later, 338 M41, Eisenhorn began the investigation that he would become most famous for across the Imperium: the elimination of the heretic Inquisitor Quixos. The investigation took place in the aftermath of the disaster of the Thracian Primaris triumph, where Eisenhorn's interrogator Gideon Ravenor was horrifically injured, an atrocity that appeared to have been engineered to free several Alpha Plus class rogue psychers from Imperial detention. Eisenhorn's investigation took him to the world of Ekan, where, posing as mutants, he and his team discovered that there was inquisitorial collusion in the scheme that had freed the rogue psychers. Inquisitor Lyko was discovered in the company of the demon host Cherubale. Taken aback by the reappearance of Cherubale, Eisenhorn focused his investigations upon the creature. This led him to the fortress world of Cadia, where he discovered another demon host, Profaniti, and ties between these demon hosts and the missing radical Inquisitor Quixos. However, his investigation was sidelined for some time by his arrest by Inquisitor Ozma for allegedly consorting with demons. Escaping, he was declared outcast by the Inquisition and forced to operate as a rogue for the remainder of the investigation. He sojourned with his Adeptus Mechanicus associate Magos Bjor on the world of Kinshare for some time, where he conferred with his prisoner Pontius Glor. During this period, he defeated a chaos cult that existed on the world and gained master-crafted force weapons. Eisenhorn next assembled a small strike group of 3 other Inquisitors, and acting in concert with them, tracked down and confronted the renegade Inquisitor Quixos. He himself was the one who killed Quixos, recovered his heretical book, the Malus Codicium, and banished both Profaniti and Cherubale to the warp. Eisenhorn was cleared of all charges against him at the conclusion of the investigation. 345 M41, he succeeded in secretly summoning the demon Cherubale and trapping him in the physical universe for interrogation and study. In 355, 10 years later, he dealt with a minor warp incursion of demons on Gudrun. It was in the year 386 M41 that he was able to avenge the death of Midas Betancourt, but it came at a considerable cost. Killing the heretic Fade Thoring cost him the lives of several associates. Placed McQuinn into a coma resulted in the destruction of his personal starship, his gun cutter, and forced him to use the demon Cherubale as an ally. To control the demon, he had to sacrifice the naive Puritan Inquisitor Bastian Vervec in an improvised chaos ritual. This foul misdeed was an important step to Eisenhorn's road to damnation. Shortly afterwards, he was the victim of a carefully planned attack orchestrated by Pontius Glor, who had escaped the Inquisition's captivity and decided to punish and torment his captors. Almost every facet of Eisenhorn's life was brought crashing down around him, including his career, as he was once again declared an outcast by Inquisitor Ozma and Haldane. His organization shattered, his own body broken, and much of his retinue dead. Eisenhorn was eventually able to call on the aid of his former pupil, Gideon Ravenor, who was now a full Inquisitor. With Ravenor's assistance, he was able to track Pontius down and eliminate him for good. However, the Pontius affair did more than deplete Eisenhorn's physical resources. It also, finally, broke down his resistance to employing radical methods of fighting chaos and the Imperium's other enemies. He began to travel with Cherubale as his constant companion. Eisenhorn largely dropped out of sight after the Pontius affair, despite his outcast status apparently being rescinded once again by the Inquisition. He has reappeared for only brief moments in the years following, to recruit new acolytes or confer with past associates, such as warning Gideon about the intentions of the chaos cult known as the Divine Frattery. Later members of the cult discussed Eisenhorn, suggesting that he may have been killed fighting their followers, as he was inside a building that they bombed, and Eisenhorn subsequently vanished from their psychic foresight. The truth of his death can be disputed, though. An Imperial-sanctioned Psyker, Gregor Eisenhorn possesses considerable natural willpower and resolve, which, combined with his pool of psychic power, makes him a potent telepath. He normally channels his psychic talent through his voice, compelling people to follow his instructions. He can focus this talent upon distinct individuals in a crowd, or upon many people at once. The most obvious physical attribute of Inquisitor Eisenhorn is his crude augmetic assist system, which can be seen projecting from the back of his head and encasing his lower limbs. This cybernetic implantation was done in a hurry near the end of the Pontius affair, and appeared to both be permanent and of subpar construction. The augmetic rig allows him reasonable movement, but he has taken to using a sword stick to aid his balance. Several Terran centuries old, he looks only roughly middle-aged to the casual observer, as his aging process has been slowed by inquisitorial rejuvenant treatments. The torture inflicted by Gorgon Lock resulted in the permanent destruction of many of the nerves in his face. As a result, he has limited facial expressions and movement, and notably can no longer smile. Once clean-shaven and dark-haired, Eisenhorn was forced to permanently shave his head after accepting his augmetic system. He normally wears sober suits of dark grey or black under long blue or black high-collared coats. Underneath the coat could once be found his sword, sheathed at his hip. It is now fashioned into a sword stick, with the scabbard forming a walking cane. Also under his coat is the chest rig for his sidearm, normally holstered under his left shoulder. His inquisitorial rosette is usually placed in an inside pocket. While he typically plays down his inquisitorial station, he occasionally chooses to proudly display the full majesty of his office. In such circumstances, he dresses more ornately and colorfully, if still in the same basic pattern of suit and long coat. His rosette is then pinned to the front of his jacket, alongside other imperial symbols and distinctions he is eligible to wear. In the early part of his career, Eisenhorn carried a power sword of unusual design. Instead of having a conventional metal blade as the focus of its energy field, the blade was itself made of pure energy. This antique, graceful, and deadly blade had been blessed by the Provost of Inks. In contrast to this priceless weapon, his standard sidearm during most of the same period was a cheap Imperial naval pattern Scipio stub pistol that had been crudely gang-marked by Loras Vibben, an ex-ganger employed by him as his bodyguard and personal aide. The grips had been replaced with ivory, upon which was etched an entwined skull and rose. Droplets of blood from the rose thorns were represented by inlaid carmine gems. Eisenhorn was initially rather embarrassed by this customization to his pistol, but later realized that he was being honored by Vibben's marking of his weapon in her gang colors. When Vibben was killed by agents of Murden I-Clone, Eisenhorn made sure to use the pistol she had altered to execute him. It was then buried with her. Eisenhorn's next signature weapon was a heavily customized bolt pistol given to him by a librarian of the Ordo Xenos' Death Watch chapter of Space Marines. Made of green-hued chase steel, it was handcrafted to be of compact dimensions so that a normal-sized man could wield it, and had a magazine housing in the hand grip. It was lost during the Quicksource investigation and never replaced with another favorite sidearm. Eisenhorn's power sword was destroyed in the battle with the demon host Cherubile, so he had Magos Geared Bew craft him two powerful force weapons, a force staff topped by a powerful psychic lodestone carved to resemble Eisenhorn's own skull, and a force sword based on Barbarizita, a blade once carried by Arianrod Esuswadir, one of Eisenhorn's deceased retainers. A very old weapon, the blade had been folded over 900 times and enhanced by potent pentagrammatic words. Originally a long, double-handed, single-edged, saber-like weapon, Barbarizita was straightened and reforged into a single-handed sword after it was broken in battle against the rogue Inquisitor Quicksource. Eisenhorn's force staff is slung across his back when not in use. The sword originally measured nearly 1.5 meters in length and had been carried by the Esquire Swadir tribe of Carthay for 19 generations. The sword's powers were enhanced by Arianrod's psychic abilities and seems to have been semi-sentient, learning from its mistress and vice versa. After Arianrod was killed on Leth 11 by a Drukhari homunculus, Eisenhorn placed the sword in his personal safe, knowing he was duty-bound to return it to the tribal leaders on Carthay. However, after his own power sword was snapped by Cherubile, Eisenhorn used Barbarizita to combat the radical Inquisitor Quicksource. Before confronting him, he approached Magos Bjor on Kinchar, who etched the blade with special pentagrammatic wards and enhanced the psychic veins to increase the sword's effectiveness against demons, knowing that Quicksource was served by at least two powerful demon hosts, Cherubile and Profaniti. Magos Bjor, an expert in metallurgy, marveled at the sword's craftsmanship, remarking to Eisenhorn that the steel had been folded and beaten to such a high density that Bjor wore out 8 adamantium drill bits performing the etching on only one side of the blade. Eisenhorn often referred to Barbarizita as if the sword had a mind of its own. Indeed, on several occasions the weapons seemed to perform tricks that Eisenhorn himself could not manage. This would indicate that the blade is possessed by some kind of warp entity. Interestingly, Eisenhorn, who most of the time sees himself as a Puritan Inquisitor, never questioned the fact that his sword seemed to think for itself. The weapon saved his life in the battle with Quicksource, although it was snapped in two by Quicksource's own demon sword, Karnagar. The broken point had absorbed enough of Eisenhorn's intent to drive itself into the rogue Inquisitor's chest, impaling him through the heart. Gregor later had expert metallurgists reforge the sword, reattaching the broken point and converting it into a shorter, more rapier-like weapon. In his hands, it was also highly useful for sensing the taint of chaos, beyond even what his own formidable psychic abilities could detect. While wielding this weapon, Eisenhorn was fast enough to deflect bullets. This sword was so powerful in his hands that he once used it to cleave a Chaos Dreadnought in two with a single stroke. He also held the only known copy of a prescribed grimoire, the Malus Codicium, which he took from the corpse of Quicksource. This accursed book details a vast array of powerful sorcerer's rituals. With the book as his teacher, Eisenhorn learned how to create demon hosts, undead thralls, and explosive warp vortexes, among other foul products of chaos. In the hands of a chaos sorcerer, these spells could cause the destruction of an entire planet. In time, Eisenhorn began to suspect that the book had a mind of its own, which led him further and further along the path towards damnation. During his final confrontation with the arch-heretic Pontius Galor, he destroyed the priceless book as a diversion. At that point, he knew much of the book's content by heart, and he continued to use this knowledge to control the demon prince Cherubael and to battle the forces of chaos. The most powerful conventional weapon in his arsenal was his gun cutter, a personal spacecraft capable of atmospheric flight, if not independent warp travel. Large enough to contain cabins and crew quarters for half a dozen people, as well as a sizable cargo deck, the cutter was fast, agile, and well armed with several autocannon turrets. Eisenhorn and his retinue also employ their own personal form of coded language, named Glossia. The basic format was created by him when he was 32 standard years of age, but it grew organically with use over the years, with several of his acolytes contributing to its form. One cannot consider the fate of a single man, nor 10, nor 100, nor 1,000. Billions will live and die by our actions here, and we have not the luxury to count the cost. Tyran, or more formally, Tyran Primus, is the former ocean world on the very edge of the Milky Way galaxy in the eastern fringe, where the Adeptus Mechanicus of the Imperium of Man maintained a small research outpost. It was on Tyran that mankind made first contact with the Tyranids in the form of High Fleet Behemoth, which destroyed all life on that once thriving world in early 745 M41 and initiated the First Tyrannic War. The precious data collected by the world's defenders within a single data codex that was preserved beneath the ruins as part of standard Imperial procedure when being overrun would prove to be the Tyran outpost's greatest legacy. For its video, picked and data records of the first Tyranid assault would be found almost a full Tyran year later by Inquisitor Kryptman. Kryptman was the man who would dedicate his life to ending the Tyranid threat to humanity. Without his arrival, the fate of the Tyran outpost might never have been known, and the Imperium taken completely unaware by the horror of the great devourer that was to come. On Tyran, Kryptman had found a sterile, dead world that now bore no sign of the once thriving ocean world it had once been. The planet had been literally sucked dry and scoured of all life, with every scrap of vegetation and even all of its water consumed by the Hive Fleet as needed biomass and nutrients for the creation of new bioforms. As Kryptman reviewed the data codex he found in the Mechanicus outpost's ruins, the full horror of the first Tyranid attack was revealed to him. The Inquisitor immediately left the ghosts of Tyran behind to warn the galaxy of the Great Devourer's approach, a terror that Kryptman named the Tyranids after the first Imperial world they had consumed. The nightmare of the Tyrannic Wars had begun, and the Imperium of Man would never be the same. Kryptman immediately ordered his astropath to project a vision of what he had discovered to the Imperium's astropathic communication network, but the Psyker could not penetrate the warp turmoil left by the passing of the alien fleet. Even the nearby Thandros Adeptus Telepathica relay matrix was obscured by the Tyranid hive minds shadow in the war. In desperation, Kryptman set course for Thandros in the hopes of re-establishing communications there. But it was already too late, for the Tyranids had attacked it and moved on long before the arrival of the Inquisitor. As with Tyran, the Telepathica adepts manning the orbiting Telepathica matrix were unable to send word of their plight to the Imperium because of the Tyranids' psychic blockade. The Thandros system had fought and died alone. Kryptman and his retinue salvaged the telepathic matrix and sent a message of warning to the unsuspecting Imperium of the magnitude of the Tyranid threat. After days had passed, he finally received orders from the Inquisitor Lords of the Ordo Xenos to travel to the planet Makridge in the realm of Ultramar, the pocket empire maintained by the Ultramarines chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. There, he would assist Chapter Master Manius Calgar in locating and eliminating the Tyranid fleet. As dictated by Imperial tradition, the alien hive fleet had been codified with an ancient and forbidding name from human legend, Behemoth. Thanks to Inquisitor Kryptman's discoveries at Tyran Primus, the defenders of Makridge had been forewarned of the horror headed towards them. Upon learning of the threat posed to Ultramar by Hive Fleet Behemoth, Manius Calgar at once drew up his plans. Deeming Makridge to be the star system most immediately threatened, Calgar ordered its already formidable defenses to be further improved. A dozen Imperial warships already hung in orbit, and each day more arrived from the warp. Massive strike cruisers cast shadows over civilian vessels and Imperial Navy destroyers, and were themselves dwarfed by the brooding presence of the Ultramarines as battle barges. Between this mighty fleet of warships and the planet's no less formidable orbital defense stations, Makridge was anything but defenseless. As the Ultramarines readied themselves for all-out war with the Tyranids, Kryptman allowed himself a glimmer of hope. He heard the news that the Imperial Navy's battlefleet Tempestus had finally been dispatched from the orbital docks at Bakar. Kryptman had met with Manius Calgar, and after long discussion agreed that Makridge was the star system most immediately threatened. A solar month later, the Tyranids attacked Makridge, and a fleet of bioships, now numbering well over 1,000 vessels, swept aside attacks by those Ultramarines' strike cruisers defending the outlying worlds as they pushed in system. A large section of the Tyranid fleet then descended upon the garden world of Prandium, a paradise once referred to as the jewel in Ultramar's crown, and left a barren ruin in its wake. Despite the Inquisitor's warnings, Calgar was shocked to the core by the fate of Prandium. After Hive Fleet Behemoth was finally destroyed, after the sacrifice of an Imperial battleship created a warp vortex that destroyed the majority of the Hive Fleet, Calgar's surviving starships came about and roared back to Makridge to try to save the beleaguered polar garrisons of Ultramarines, who had been engaged against the Tyranids for days, while the Imperial fleet engaged the Great Devourer in the void. Calgar, feeling that the situation was becoming critical, sent the 3rd and 7th Ultramarines companies ahead in their fast strike cruisers, while his remaining damaged warships limped back to Makridge. Despite horrendous losses inflicted upon the Tyranid fleet from Makridge's orbital and polar defense grids, many Tyranid organisms were able to reach the surface of the planet. The Tyranid swarm swept across the planet with the most intense fighting in the region of the northern polar defense installations. Though the Ultramarines fleet was able to destroy the bioships, horrific casualties were suffered by the planet's population as well as the chapter. Kalgar went down to the planet's surface, leading the Third Company against the ravenous hordes of the Great Devourer. The entirety of the elite First Company was wiped out to a man, whilst defending the Northern Pole's defense grid. The Ultramarines' First Company was gone, and the Third and Seventh sorely diminished. It would be many long years before the chapter could properly replace its losses from the Battle of Mackridge, but replace them it would. In the aftermath of the First Tyrannic War, there was little the Imperium could do to strike back at its new and terrifying alien foe. High Fleet Behemoth had arrived from a virtually unexplored quarter of the galaxy, emerging from the cold void of intergalactic space, and had all but disappeared after the Battle of Mackridge. 2.5 standard centuries passed, with neither sight nor sound of further Tyranid incursions. Then, without warning, a new Tyranid invasion of the galaxy arrived in 993 M41, and no one could be sure how many planets had fallen to them already. Hive Fleet Kraken appeared to be made up of many sub-fleets, which moved to attack worlds across an entire sector simultaneously. The alarming disruption in the warp brought about by the Hive Fleet's passage blocked out astropathic communication beyond the besieged star systems, and warp travel in their vicinity became dangerously unpredictable. Inquisitor Lord Kryptman's activities during this tumultuous time are not recorded, but suffice it to say, he was more than likely actively involved in combating the renewed Tyranid menace. Less than 5 Terran years after the defeat of Hive Fleet Kraken in the Second Tyrannic War, Inquisitor Lord Kryptman noted the telltale signs of yet another Tyranid invasion of the galaxy in 997 M41. He implemented the Kryptman sensors, burning out dozens of astropaths in the attempt to contact scores of worlds on every fringe of the Imperium, in an attempt to divine the location of the new Tyranid invasion's entry vector. Slowly, the responses, and lack of them, formed a pattern, and the venerable Inquisitor was able to chart the course of the Tyranids' latest Hive Fleet to arrive in the Milky Way galaxy. Codenamed Leviathan, this time the Tyranids were approaching from below the galactic plane, attacking from 2 points spaced wide apart in the shape of a closing pair of jaws, cutting off large portions of the galaxy from warp travel or astropathic communication. In 999 M41, at great cost in human life, a combined force of Planetary Defense Force troops, 2 regiments of the Imperial Guard, the Ultramarines and Mortifactors chapters of Astartes, and a Death Watch kill team under the command of Inquisitor Kryptman himself, crushed the left half of Hive Fleet Leviathan on the world of Tarsis Ultra. The Inquisitor became involved in the defense of Tarsis Ultra in 999 M41 when a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan was discovered to be moving towards the planet. Imperial forces arrived to defend the world, which consisted of the Ultramarines' 4th Company, led by Captain Uriel Ventris, a detachment from the Mortifactors, led by Chaplain Astador, the 10th Logres Regiment, led by Colonel Octavius Rabalak, the 933rd Death Corps of Krieg Regiment, led by Colonel Tryman Stagler, and the Tarsan Planetary Defense Force regiments headed by Major Arius Satria. Kryptman was on hand to share his extensive knowledge of the Tyranids with the commanders in aid of the war effort. He was also accompanied by Magos biologist Vianco Locard, an expert on the Tyranids, and a Death Watch kill team led by Captain Bannon. Despite an initial victory in destroying a Hive ship during a void battle, Inquisitor Kryptman wished to invoke Exterminatus upon the world of Chodelis, the next planet in the path of the Tyranids. This was to prevent that world from being devoured and swelling the aliens' numbers, as planetary evacuation was too slow. Captain Ventress vehemently opposed this decision and supported an alternative solution proposed by the Imperial Navy's Lord Admiral Laszlo Tiberius to slow down the Tyranids by exploding a hydrogen plasma refinery in space to destroy another Hive ship. However, Kryptman had lied to him, and with the assistance of the Mortifactors Astartes, invoked the Exterminatus anyway. During the repeated Tyranid attacks on Tarsus Ultra, Kryptman, along with his retinue, studied the biology of the Tyranid corpses killed in combat. During one expedition, a lictor, which had earlier landed on the planet, attacked his team, but was fended off by the Death Watch. The Inquisitor immediately ordered Captain Bannon to capture the lictor without killing it, which they did. This proved pivotal to the war, as Magos Locard was able to concoct a poison from the alien's genetic structure that would allow the Imperials to defeat the entire swarm by infecting the Tyranid Norn Queen, the source of all the swarm's bioforms, aboard the last remaining Hive ship commanding the tendril of the Leviathan attacking Tarsus Ultra. The Death Watch team, led by Ventress, accomplished this mission, ending the war shortly before the few remaining Imperial defenders were overwhelmed by the Tyranid swarms. The Imperium had won its first victory against the Third Tyranid assault upon the galaxy, destroying their swarms nearest to Terra and re-establishing astropathic contact with the worlds between the Leviathan's jaws. And yet, the Leviathan continued to carve its bloody path through the Imperium. Perhaps its greatest triumph was the destruction of the vital forge world of Griffon IV, home of the Legio Griffonicus, the War Griffins, Titan Legion. Kryptman knew he had to slow down the Hive Fleet's advance to buy time for the Imperial Navy's battle fleets Solar and Tempestus to muster. With grim finality, he ordered a cordon sanitaire established and decided to implement an almost sector-wide scorched earth tactic to prevent the Tyranids from multiplying beyond the Imperium's capacity to deal with them. Every world within the reach of the Leviathan's advance was to be evacuated and undergo immediate exterminatus wherever possible, so that its biomass could not become new grist for the Tyranids' production of new bioforms. With one stark, callous decision, the Inquisitor Lord had inflicted the Imperium's worst act of genocide upon its own since the days of the Horus Heresy. Kryptman was denounced for this action as a radical and a traitor at the highest level of the Imperium, and even by many members of the Inquisition. When migrating orcs claimed the score of the former human worlds that had been evacuated, he was finally declared Carta Extremis by his fellow Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos. neither a heretic nor a radical warranting execution, but too unstable and eager to use destructive means to be allowed to continue to operate as an Inquisitor. Yet he still had loyal allies within the Death Watch, and initiated a plan to halt High Fleet Leviathan without the loss of further human life. When a gene-stealer-infested space hulk drifted from the warp, members of the Death Watch loyal to him captured a brood of those vicious Tyranid bioforms still in stasis. Using the brood of captured gene-stealers, the Inquisitor engineered a Tyranid invasion within the Orc-held Octavius system, very close to the Leviathan's line of advance. The crowded Orc cities of Octavius, so teeming with life, were the source of a huge Orcish infestation, and soon drew the entirety of High Fleet Leviathan into the tight cluster of Orc-held star systems that comprised the Greenskins' so-called Octavius Empire. Kryptman's plan seemingly worked, for Leviathan was diverted from its course to Tara, and both Orcs and Tyranids were now thoroughly occupied with destroying each other, initiating the conflict known as the Octavius War. However, one thing is certain. Each of these xenos species thrives on war, and there remains the possibility that if the Tyranids emerge victorious, the Imperium shall have to face a threat far greater than before, as in victory, Tyranids effectively lose no military strength or resources, their casualties, and still living warrior strains reabsorbed by invading Hive ships along with the remains of the conquered worlds. Thus, every victory has no repercussions, only benefits. This also means that the Tyranids will assimilate vast quantities of the strong, aggressive Orcoid DNA that makes them such successful survivors and incorporate it into their own bioconstructs. Indeed, worlds on the edge of the conflict have begun to file with Imperial Segmentum Command picked captures of Tyranid assault organisms that are larger and more formidable than ever before. Even though the Octavius War brought the Imperium invaluable time to muster and bolster its defenses, the potential consequences of Kryptman's manipulation of this alien threat are too horrible to contemplate, and ultimately might prove disastrous in the long run. The minor Tyranid Hive fleet Tiamat, named after the Tiamat system in which it was first encountered in the 35th millennium, is a unique phenomenon. A Tyranid incursion fleet which has claimed a cluster of planets without entirely stripping them of biomass. Its primary base of operations in the Tiamat system is the jungle world of Xaiaphoria, the surface of which it has begun to tyrannoform into some type of biomechanical psychic resonator whose purpose remains unknown and worrisome to the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition. As time passed, more and more reports of missing Imperial starships and lost fleets in the region drifted into the nearby Death Watch Fortress halt mode. The common denominator in each of these cases was that the vessels were last reported in the vicinity of the Tiamat system, far from safe haven. Watch Commander Vilnius ordered an immediate survey of the area. Kill Team Gunheim departed from halt mode to investigate the reports of missing trade fleets near the system. The Death Watch drifted in-system unnoticed and landed upon the planet. There, they discovered the biomechanical xenos superstructure that covered the planet's largest continent. When this vast device pulsed, sending a tsunami of psychic energy rolling across the planet, the kill team's librarian suffered a catastrophic cranial rupture. His scream alerted nearby Tyranids, and soon the remaining battle brothers were surrounded by swarming xenos. Before he and his remaining battle brothers were torn apart, Watch Sergeant Yunhai managed to send one final Vox transmission to the team's orbiting Corvus Black Star, warning of the nightmare his warriors had uncovered. In the wake of these events, Watch Fortress Holtmote received an unexpected guest, the infamous exiled Inquisitor Fidus Kryptman. Watch Commander Vilnius agreed to an audience with the outcast, who had his own grim theories regarding the purpose of the mysterious High Fleet. Together, the two began to formulate a plan that will see whatever the Tyranids are creating on Zyphoria utterly obliterated. I will leave this galaxy a better place than the spiritual cesspool into which I was born, percolating in its own self-righteous stagnation. High Inquisitor Bronislaw Czevak was a distinguished and controversial member of the Ordo Xenos, active in the Mobius subsector during the second half of the 41st millennium. After almost 400 standard years of service to the Imperium and the Inquisition, and already suspected by some of corruption, he disappeared during an archaeotech reclamation on the planet Darkturus. Except for a short interval, he was missing for some 30 standard years and was presumed dead. He secretly resurfaced in the 1st century of the 42nd millennium, having spent much of the intervening time as a prisoner in the Black Library, the secret Eldari craft world that is hidden in the webway and acts as their repository for chaos lore. He eventually acquired a new retinue of acolytes and has since embarked on a self-imposed mission as a freelance agent, working to thwart chaos and champion the cause of the Imperium of Man. He directs his main efforts against the Chaos Sorcerer Ahriman, who is his prime opponent and nemesis. Imperial authorities regard him at best as a renegade in possession of dangerous but valuable knowledge, and at worst as a heretic and traitor liable to be summarily executed. Throughout the galaxy, traitors, chaos cultists, heretics, imperial opportunists, and many aliens crave his knowledge of the Black Library and its lore, while the Eldari Black Council has likely condemned him to death, considering the same knowledge too dangerous to be held by an untrustworthy monkey. It is not known where or when Czevak was born and raised. He attended a schola progenium called the Schola Biblos, which indicates he was the orphan son of imperial servants who died for the emperor's cause. As he does not possess psychic ability, is not gifted physically, and is only an average fighter, he was presumably selected to become an acolyte of the Inquisition due to his heightened survival instincts, his razor-sharp intellect, and his keen curiosity. Czevak served as an acolyte to Inquisitor Fëanor of the Ordo Xenos, and eventually achieved the status of High Inquisitor, who served primarily in the Mobius sub-sector. He was considered a learned and opinionated proponent of the Thorian philosophical sect of the Inquisition. However, his unconventional views, which some of his fellow Inquisitors considered to be of the radical persuasion, prevented him from becoming the Grand Master of the Inquisition's Mobian Conclave, even though he was its senior-most member. After almost 400 standard years of service to the Imperium, he had undergone extensive rejuvenant treatments that kept him alive long past the human body's natural lifespan. By the late 41st millennium, he was little more than a desiccated frame held together by a specially constructed cryogenic suspension suit. A blister helmet concealed an implanted bionic controller for the suit, as well as his hairless scalp and deeply lined face. However, his intelligence, curiosity, and argumentative, opinionated manner had remained as sharp as ever, coupled with his accumulated vast knowledge and experience. During his long and distinguished service as an alien hunter for the Imperium, Czevak came into close contact with the Eldari many times and established a relationship with them, especially the leading Eldari of the declining Iyanden craft world. Notable among them was Yggdrasil, one of the Iyanden Farseers. These contacts were apparently officially sanctioned or tolerated by Inquisition authorities, at least at the start. At some point, while he was the Eldari's guest in Iyanden at Yggdrasil's invitation, he was treated to a unique spectacle. In an unheard-of gesture, the Eldari allowed him and members of his entourage to witness a performance by the Harlequins. This honor, however, as well as his whole interaction with them, may have been part of their plans to manipulate him. Czevak learned a lot about their culture, history, and science. This included some knowledge of the Wraith Guard and of the related Eldari reanimation and soul transference technology encapsulated within the Soul Stones. Bronislaw was deeply dissatisfied with the Imperium's cultural and technological stagnation and repression. Through his congress with the Eldari, he had come to believe that the terrible nature of threats like the Tyranids required nothing less than the physical leadership of the Emperor of Mankind himself once more. He became obsessed with utilizing the Eldari's resurrective incarnation technology in order to make the dying Emperor whole once again. This was thought by others in the Inquisition to be at best misguided and at worst treason. Heated inquisitorial conclaves were held, and Czevak was often threatened with sanction by the more Puritan Inquisitors and generally admonished to stop pursuing the study of alien lore. In the late 41st millennium, he discovered the ancient crash site of the lost Eldari craft world Uthuriel, which had fallen to the planet Darkturus in the Mobius subsector. Czevak led an Ordo Xenos expedition to the planet, a large operation that required support from the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Adeptus Ministorum, and the Imperial Guard, and required the presence of his full retinue of acolytes as well as a Death Watch kill team. He was specifically looking for the splintered Craftworld's shrine dedicated to Kayla Mencha Kane, and its avatar of the Eldari war god. The shrine was indeed found, and accompanied by the Death Watch Space Marines and his retinue, he entered it to discover the intact, enormous statue of Kane on his throne. Czevak secretly hoped to glean further knowledge concerning Avatar reanimation technology by studying the artifact in order to further his aim of resurrecting the Emperor. His retinue discovered their master's true purpose only at the last moment. Unbeknownst to the Inquisitor, the Inquisition hierarchy of the subsector had reached the limit of its tolerance for his radical ideas and continuing involvement with xenos, and had decided to rein him in. Upon discovery of the Avatar of Cain, the Death Watch, secretly acting under the direct orders of Mobius Inquisitorial Conclave Grand Master Ephisto Specht, placed orbital bombardment markers on the statue, while also announcing their intention to take Czevak and his retinue into custody for transport to an Inquisition base. There, Czevak's eventual fate would be decided. Although he accepted his arrest, a misunderstanding caused violence to break out amongst the Imperials. In the middle of the firefight, a troop of Eldari Harlequins made a wholly unexpected appearance and proceeded to kill the members of the Death Watch squad, while leaving Czevak and his acolytes untouched. The Harlequins activated a webway communications interface to a meeting of the Black Council, the governing body of the Black Library within the labyrinthine dimension. The Black Council was the closest thing the Eldari had to a centralized advisory body for their entire species. The Council made Czevak an offer he could not refuse. He was invited to the library to study its accumulated lore concerning chaos and to help thwart the chaos sorcerer Ahriman, who had tried to gain entry into the webway and the library for millennia in pursuit of his own quest to better understand and master the power of chaos and his own patron, the chaos god Tzeentch. Over the objections of his then interrogator Remus Clute, Czevak accepted the Black Council's offer. Clute, previously his chirurgeon, then proceeded to inject him with various vaccines as a precaution for the journey, among them a vaccine for a powerful strain of the meme virus. This virus infected the carrier and altered his neural patterns to produce an insatiable, irrational thirst for knowledge, a near photographic memory and enhanced pattern recognition ability. It also had occasional side effects, including the inducement of vivid hallucinations. Clute knew that Czevak's cryo suit would probably inhibit the inoculation of the meme virus, leaving Czevak infected. Czevak accepted this, as this meant that the lore of the Black Library would be even more accessible. The Black Library itself is a dark craft world eternally traveling through the webway. Its location and route are secret, hidden from all but the Harlequins and the members of the Black Council. Like all craft worlds, the vessel is conscious and psychoactive, hiding itself from all psychic probes, while simultaneously repelling warp entities and intrusions. It is an enormous construct with a scorched crystalline appearance, covered in veins and flourishes, but with the typical flowing grace of Eldari architecture. The interior is an intentional labyrinth with all manner of convoluted passages, corridors, and chambers. Bubble vaults full of stasis caskets containing forbidden lore and dangerous artifacts hang from the superstructure, whilst inside and above are myriad citadels, obelisks, monoliths, and spires where the rest of the craft world's arcane contents are kept. Czevak was taken to the library, where he mainly studied at the Wraith Tower, the section devoted to humanity's interaction with chaos, the accumulated lore of the Imperial traitors. Several standard years later, and no longer needing his cryogenic suspension suit to enhance his mobility due to the webway's natural regenerative effects upon human tissue, a much younger-looking Czevak returned to real space and the Imperium. His return was a major political event. Adding to the controversy surrounding him, he had become a celebrity, looked on as a champion by the radicals in the Inquisition, while serving as a lightning rod to Puritans, who nevertheless craved his newly acquired knowledge even as they sought to destroy him and any who supported him. The political astute Inquisition authorities allowed him to resume his duties and reassemble a retinue of acolytes. They assigned Clude, now an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor in his own right, to look after his protection, mindful of his knowledge's value. However, his return to the Imperium proved to be short-lived. Not long after, while attempting to run through the blockade erected by the forces of chaos around the world of Cadia that signaled the beginning of the 13th Black Crusade in 999 M41, he became the victim of a superbly executed Thousand Suns illusion and ambush, and eventually found himself captive in the Impossible Fortress, the Chaos Sorcerer Ahriman's own flagship, where he was held for several standard years. The Sorcerer wanted his knowledge of the Black Library, and more specifically, the activation rune codes for a webway portal discovered by the Thousand Suns on Itiamnum 3. His apprentice, Korban Zarkos, was tasked with Czevak's lengthy interrogation, during which the Inquisitor went through unimaginable physical and psycho-spiritual torture. He confessed all his most embarrassing and personal secrets, as well as his knowledge of the methods and assets of the Inquisition. He even revealed damning secrets held in the library, but nothing of the library itself or of a way to find it. Under the most arcane and unbearable torture, he resisted all attempts to divulge the library's own secrets, and he realized that the library had somehow psychically secured his knowledge of it, rendering him unable to reveal information about it under any form of coercive pressure. Finally, the traitors produced the ravaged form of Joaquin Desdemondra, a former associate and secret love interest of Czevak's, who had been canonized as a living saint by the ecclesiarchy. Being a reanimate, an immortal mutant, she was tortured in front of him with repeated death by incineration. His love and sorrow over the suffering of another finally broke the library's psychic wards. Nahriman's subsequent and forceful mind invasion forced the Inquisitor to unwittingly reveal the Itiamnum 3 portal's rune codes. Even more damaging, unwilling revelations by Czevak were averted though, when the troop of Harlequins assigned to watch him suddenly appeared, boarding over from a cloaked Eldari vessel. After a fight with the Sorcerer, they managed to take Czevak away from the traitors. Bronislaw was returned to the Webway and the Black Library. This time he was imprisoned, for his own and the galaxy's protection, according to the Eldari, as one of its living specimens and exhibits. Confined in a cell within the Wraith Tower that, like the rest of the library's interior, was mostly transparent, he spent his days furthering his knowledge of how to combat chaos. Thanks to Eldari medical attention and healing techniques, as well as the Wraithbone environment's restorative properties, he quickly recuperated from the Thousand Suns tortures. He naturally rejuvenated, acquiring an even younger athletic appearance and boundless energy. He had occasional visitors, curious Eldari who wanted to personally see the human polymath, chaos expert and famous prey of Ahriman. He was once even scrutinized by a rare human visitor, likely an Illuminatus, an incident that set his mind to thoughts of escape. His personal attendant was Yggdrasil's daughter, Adara Ke, a long-serving guardian scribe of the library, but it is not known whether she was assigned because of Czevak's previous relationship with the unending. He became the subject of a Black Council meeting as, quite unexpectedly to the Eldari Farseers, Ahriman had used the knowledge extracted from him to breach the webway. Because of this threat, most of the Council's members were in favor of either imprisoning Czevak for life, or even better, terminating him as he was deemed too independent, unpredictable and dangerous due to his knowledge, which most Farseers were convinced would eventually somehow fall into the wrong hands. Farseer Yggdrasil, who sat on the council as Yundan's representative, disagreed with the majority's verdict on Czevak, believing that he still had a worthwhile and beneficial role for the Eldari to play in the galaxy. He instructed Adara Ke to help him escape while the Craftworld's attention and most of its residents were at the Black Council meeting. Adara informed the Inquisitor of the Black Council's proceedings and of her father's plan to have him escape death and the library. She gave him a bulky, ancient Imperial tome with covers of burnished, golden, astonishingly lightweight, and resilient metal with a unique sheen. The book's title, written in High Gothic, was the Atlas Infernal. It was an organic, adaptable map of the webway, dating from before the time of the Horus Heresy. A psionically negative item, its pages were the stretched pieces of the skin of an untouchable who had once been a Sister of Silence, attached to lightweight golden frames. The veins, capillaries, and arteries on the pages could reconfigure themselves to show the reader his desired destination within the webway, being constantly fed oxygen by an intricate regulated pump embedded in the book's spine. Using both the anti-psyker and adaptable mapping properties of the Atlas, Czevak was able to escape the Black Library through the webway. He subsequently used the book to traverse the galaxy through the webway in order to outsmart his Harlequin pursuers, and also in a quest to thwart Ahriman and his minions. Another likely objective was locating his former associate and secret love interest, Joaquin Desdemondra, still held captive by the Thousand Sons. The sorcerer in turn was fervently looking for him, craving his knowledge. The Inquisitors spent a number of standard years wandering the galaxy through the webway, making plans against Ahriman, consumed by guilt over the deaths caused by his torture-induced revelations. In the meantime, Clute, who respected and admired him, was remorseful over failing to prevent his capture. He spent 2 standard decades after his disappearance over Cadia on a mission to find him, a secret objective his superiors and even his retinue were unaware of. He had assembled a highly unconventional cadre of acolytes, and based on the rogue trader starship Malskaith, he made frequent extended forays to the Eye of Terror. In his search for Czevak, Clute was looking for artifacts that would allow him access to the webway. Sometime during the first few decades of the 42nd millennium, Clute and his team found and transported to the Malskaith a webway portal called the Lost Fornicle of Urien Merdis. To everyone's surprise, the portal soon activated, and a visitor who turned out to be Czevak stepped through, pursued by an Inchnuplasm which he eventually managed to vanquish. Following the initial surprise and a heated argument, his associates accepted Clute's assertion. This was indeed the infamous, irascible Czevak, known among Imperial, Xenos, and Chaotic operatives galaxy-wide, and long presumed dead, or worse, having become Ahriman's plaything. The famous Inquisitor, for his part, looked almost 4 centuries younger, and had lost none of his opinionated ways and cutting sarcasm. Clute and associates were now ready to return to the fold of the Imperium. Yet Czevak had no illusions. The only thing the Imperium and Inquisitors of any persuasion wanted was his knowledge and the conclusions he had drawn from it. In the eyes of the Imperial authorities, he was considered too compromised, and either a heretic or a traitor. Before this argument was resolved, the first part of a typically ingenious and cunning long-term plot by the Thousand Sons to recapture him, or rather, to take the Atlas Infernal, started to play out in the form of an encounter with a cornered berserker vessel. A complicated series of clues to Korben Zarkos' whereabouts followed, involving a captured cogitator from the defeated cornered vessel, and the avoidance of a trap set by Zarkos to ensnare the Inquisitor. He and the retinue reasoned that Zarkos was attempting to replicate demonic psychic vivisection as practiced millennia before by the Decropsicum, a long-destroyed dark mechanicum cult, while simultaneously carrying out a campaign of carnage and death in order to provide the necessary psychic power to summon a suitable demonic subject. Czevak and company eventually acquired a piece of a vivisected demon that was the only successful result of the Decropsicum's experiments. The psychic fragment of the ancient and extremely powerful Zinchian Lord of Change, Mamoshad, whose greed and ambition had been bound into a coin. Czevak proceeded to interrogate the demonic fragment about Zarkos and Ahriman's whereabouts and plans. It was an unceasing multi-day session without respite, during which the increasingly unhinged Czevak mercilessly tormented the demon. Mamoshad, in turn, was taking advantage of the raging meme virus within the Inquisitor's mind to apply equal torture to him through denials and obvious misinformation. Eventually, Czevak found out that the Thousand Sons were planning to reassemble and re-release Mamoshad as their servant, spreading havoc in the galaxy and helping Ahriman breach the webway again. The event was to take place on Melmoth's world, a Nurglite planet in the Eye of Terror, which became Czevak's next intended destination. By now, Clute had had enough. He had realized that his hero, friend, and mentor had been drawn into an elaborate trap by the master deceiver Ahriman and his minions, who knew the workings of Czevak's brilliant, hyperactive mind all too well. Clute secretly ordered a change of course towards Cadia, and specifically the nearby top-secret inquisitorial fortress at Nemesis Tercera. Another heated argument with Czevak ensued when the latter found out. The naivete and brilliance of both men became apparent. Finally, Czevak agreed to return to the Inquisition and the Imperium, but insisted on a secret approach to the base and entry through a back door. Clute and his retinue reluctantly accepted. Czevak never intended to return to the stagnant Imperium, drawing on his tremendous conviction about stopping Ahriman and doing his part to better the galaxy, he continued his ongoing campaign of counter-bluff, counterintelligence, and one-upmanship. He therefore turned the wishes of his only remaining friends to his advantage. Using the Lost Fornacle and the Atlas Infernal, Czevak led his associates to an Inquisition reliquary chamber kilometers below the subsurface base. One of the relics was a functioning, unguarded webway portal, a major lapse in the millennia-old base's security, which he had taken advantage of before. Thanks to the portal, the team from the Malascaith entered the fortress undetected. He then instructed the astonished and fearful team to start looking for a specific item. It wasn't long before the team was detected and was assaulted by Grey Knights and Inquisitorial stormtroopers. Czevak saved the day by brandishing the sought-after relic, which was a long-abandoned heretical experiment, a clone pariah embryo in a bell jar stasis casket, a virtually unheard of Omega-null entity. The severely mauled remnants of the team then returned to the Malascaith, which had been detected and was simultaneously engaged in battle with an Inquisition flotilla. Sustaining heavy damage, the starship managed to extract itself by making a desperate, blind warp jump, during which Czevak came close to being slain by the mysteriously appearing and equally inexplicable disappearing Harlequins. Czevak's manipulation and his willful endangerment of his associates' lives in order to get the pariah embryo resulted in a further violent confrontation with Clued. Czevak finally apologized and acknowledged his friend's loyalty and concerns, while Clued realized that they were indeed on their own, as the Imperium would not tolerate loyal but unconventional warriors with an independent streak, questionable associates, and a knowledge of deep and frightening secrets. With the Malascaith and its crew hiding in an inaccessible and unstable area of the Eye of Terror called the Scorpento Maestrale, Czevak used the Lost Fornacle webway portal to arrive at Melmoth's world. Knowingly walking into the traps Zarkos and Ahriman had so painstakingly laid for him, he realized that the whole planet was to be used as a birthing cradle for Mamoshad, and the Thousand Suns had forced the slothful, Nurglite population to mine a warp mineral that would accelerate the greater demon's birth. He was arrested and taken to Zarkos, who, being a shapeshifter and telepath, was being warned remotely by Ahriman. He had no need of Czevak any longer, except as a sacrifice to Mamoshad, who had expressly demanded his life. Ahriman knew he could get all the information he wanted from the Atlas Infernal. Mind-forcing Czevak to reveal where he was hiding the book, Ahriman was actually fooled by the Inquisitor into handling the pariah casket instead, which immediately started draining his psychic essence. The wounded Ahriman hastily retreated from Zarkos' body, who was then destroyed by exposure to the pariah. Mamoshad was next. Just as it was hatching back into existence from a colossal, demonic egg, Czevak threw the pariah embryo at it, stunning its rebirth and ultimately banishing it back to the warp. After a skirmish with the ubiquitous Harlequins who were also on the planet, he returned to the Malascaith, which was again in trouble because he had been detected by Ahriman's fleet. In an extremely dangerous and ingenious play typical of Czevak, He had the ship elude its pursuers by entering a huge webway portal on the surface of the area's highly unusual cryostar. While the Malskaith was dry-docked in the webway for repairs, the Harlequins again appeared. However, this time, Czevak was expecting them. Knowing they wanted both the Atlas and his life, he tricked them into approaching, and then opened the book. The volume's potent psychic null field mortally wounded the troop's Shadow Seer and injured the rest of the Harlequins, who disappeared to save themselves. Through the dying Shadow Seer, Czevak sent a message to the Black Council. He was going to find and stop Ahriman on his own terms, and not as an Eldari puppet. In the early 42nd millennium, Czevak, Krut, and his retinue carried on with their self-appointed crusade against the enemies of mankind, and especially Ahriman and his plans. Although now hunted by almost every faction in the galaxy, he has remarkable freedom of action, thanks to the Atlas Infernal, his vast knowledge and intelligence, and his able and loyal associates. His multi-decade sojourn in various parts of the webway had a naturally rejuvenating effect on him, and he currently looks about 400 Terran years younger than his actual chronological age. He is almost 440 standard years old, but with great amounts of newly acquired energy. He is still willingly carrying the meme virus, refusing treatment. He still uses the previously implanted cybernetic mind impulse socket to interface with all kinds of machinery. When in combat, he favors a pilfered Harlequin overcoat, whose holographic cloaking abilities, embedded wrist-mounted monofilament wire weapon, and unnatural extra-dimensional storage capacity he often puts to good use. Inherently dangerous, independent, and unpredictable, Bronislaw Czevak is a worthy opponent of the enemies of the Emperor and of humanity, who should not be underestimated.